your help. Good evening and welcome to the Olympia World Affairs Council final program of our program year. Those of you who have been with us through thick and thin know that we always have programs between September and May every year, and then we go on a summer hiatus and we don't have programs for June, July, and August. So here we are tonight for our final program, and here we are tonight for our only second, count them, just 2 in-person programs since COVID. So this is really wonderful to be back together again in person, even though there aren't very many of you, and there should be more of you, but it's a beautiful evening outside. So anyway, I'm Karen Valenzuela, past president of Olympia World Affairs Council, and before I introduce our speakers for this evening, let me just do a little housekeeping. You know, restrooms are just down the hallway here, emergency exits to our back, and now I feel like your flight attendant. So you know that we're here tonight to hear from our Lieutenant Governor, Denny. The last time Denny was with us, he was still a member of Congress, so nice to catch up with him as he's back here in Olympia. Apologies to all of you. Our advertisement for this event said that we would be selling copies of Denny's newest book tonight, Sausage. Makes you kind of wonder what that book might be about. But it turns out that because he is a government official, here speaking to us tonight in his capacity as a government official, we can't also sell his book. So you can get his book, Sausage, at either Browsers downtown or the gift shop on the legislative campus. And OWAC is also going to try to make signed copies of that book available through our website. So in about a week or 2 weeks, if you go on our website, you may be able to buy copies of his book that way too. So apologies for not having them here to be able to sell with you this evening. I don't think our speaker needs much of an introduction, so I'm not going to go through. Our microphones are too close together. Not going to go through Denny's resume for you. I will just say, Denny, thank you for joining us this evening. This is wonderful to have you back with us. And we'll follow our usual format. Denny will speak for about 30 or 40 minutes, and then we'll have lots of time at the end for Q&A and discussion. And then we must clear out of this room by 9 o'clock at the very latest. So thank you again for all being here, and thank you, Denny.
Thank you, Karen. Can you hear me in the back of the room?
Yes.
Yes.
And if I talk this loud for the next 30 minutes, I will be exhausted for the next 4 days. It's great to be back with you. I think this is my 3rd or 4th time with you, either as an observer or as a presenter over the last many years. I'm going to admit it up front, because the mic is now on. I'm going to admit up front, I think the World Affairs Council is cool. I love your purpose, I love your mission, I love these salon conversations about America's place in the world and global events, and I think it's important. And at some point in my life downstream and in the future, should I have more time, I'm going to be sitting out at one of those tables on a regular basis, because I really like what you do. I was asked to speak today a little bit about the relationship between the role of Lieutenant Governor and international relations. Surprise, surprise, there is one. But up front, let me say, I want to speak less than 30 minutes and leave more time for Q&A. My perception has always been this group has lots of questions on their mind, lots of opinions on their mind, which I will prompt you to freely share, if you could, please. I want to preface this, however, by saying this is my 51st year of intermittent state service. Haven't been continuous public service in that time, but I began, as my dear friend Steve Lundeen knows, in 1973 as a member of the first staff of the Office of Program Research. And in that 51 years, I've never observed a position about which there was less understood than the position of Lieutenant Governor. It's amazing. People people have the wrong idea about what lieutenant governor does. In many ways, it's actually the least important of statewide elected officials. I happen to know this because it's the lowest paid and deservedly so, as a matter of fact. But it's a little counterintuitive because of the title. People imbue it with, in some ways, a whole lot more importance than it actually possesses, although the office does do some things that matter. Basically, there are three buckets here. Number one, the lieutenant governor is an insurance policy in case the governor gets hit by a bus. Because according to our state constitution, the lieutenant governor would become governor. And indeed, according to the Constitution, anytime the governor leaves Washington state airspace, I become acting governor. That too sounds a whole lot more glamorous than it actually is, but it is a part of the job description. Number two, and this is, in my humble opinion, the most important. The lieutenant governor is the president of the state senate. And for those of you who are TVW addicts, and as the co-founder and first CEO of TVW, I'm absolutely certain you all are TVW addicts. You know that I am the presiding officer of the state senate. That's actually the most fun part of my job, in my opinion, and the most important job. The job is to enforce the rules of the Senate and make parliamentary rulings, and even more important than that, set a tone for civil discourse. Basically in charge of rules of general conduct and comportment. And that's something about which I believe very strongly. Because it turns out that if you engage in nonstop ad hominem with people with whom you disagree, it's hard to get stuff done.
Yeah.
You may have that strong disagreement with them today. If you end up calling them names, guess what? Tomorrow, when there might be some common ground, good luck. So, presiding officer of the Senate is something that I think is the most important part of my job. But then thirdly, other duties as assigned. And boy, are there. The lieutenant governor either appoints or is a member of 36, by our last count, committees, boards, or commissions. Anytime they have created a committee or a commission in the legislature and they don't think they have enough members on it, they seem to throw the lieutenant governor onto that commission. But one, which is created by law, and I think is a first among equals in terms of these other assignments, is the lieutenant governor, according to law, chairs something called, wait for it, the Legislative Committee on Economic Development and International Relations. So, in fact, the lieutenant governor has a role in international relations, oftentimes leading or sponsoring foreign missions, be they trade or cultural. We didn't do any of that in the first 2 years of my term of office as a consequence, obviously, of the pandemic. But we've begun again. Just last week, I sent a trade mission and a cultural mission to South Korea, and they just returned. This fall, I will be going to both Mexico and to Taiwan as a part of trade missions. Taiwan is an interesting one because of the United States' unique relationship with Taiwan. It's not something, frankly, the governor can or should do, but the lieutenant governor can, and I will. We also receive in our office foreign dignitaries. The governor's schedule is such that he just can't meet all the diplomats who come through Olympia. And guess what? A lot of them do. Just this afternoon, I was meeting with a diplomatic delegation from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Here is a list of the nations with whom I have met at the consul general or above, meaning ambassador rank, as they visited Olympia. In the 2.5 years that I had been lieutenant governor, not quite, remembering there was some pandemic where we couldn't meet. Ethiopia, Malta, Kazakhstan, Germany. Ukraine, France, Japan. India, Democratic Republic of Congo, Uganda, Taiwan, South Korea, Ireland, United Kingdom, Netherlands, Philippines, Finland, Vietnam, Hungary, Poland, Guatemala, Chile, Mexico, El Salvador, Peru, Honduras, Austria. I even met with a group of realtors from Mongolia. Not a diplomatic example. So, an example of the kind of work under what we call LC, the Legislative Committee on Economic Development and International Relations, that we are engaged in right now is an effort to forge stronger relations with the province to the north, British Columbia. Now, this is predicated on some strongly held beliefs on my part. One which is fact-based, namely Canada is our nation's leading trading partner and our state's leading trading partner, has been the case since trade with China waned several years ago. And just as importantly, there is this enormous and vast strategic importance in our relations with Canada. We share the largest international border in the world, 5,525 miles, that has been peaceful and largely open throughout its history. It is not an exaggeration to say, this is going to sound like a strong statement, but it is true. Without Canada, there is no America. And what I mean by that is if you fast rewind, look back, our nation was enabled to develop and grow and prosper and expand because we had these two wonderful moats on the east and the west. The moat on the east was called the Atlantic Ocean, the moat on the west was called the Pacific Ocean. And then we had largely friendly relations in the south with Mexico, at least since World War I, when we caught them trying to enter the war against us. And they decided that wasn't a good idea. And Canada to the north. Because those were peaceful, good relations. They're more than allies, they're friends, and we share common values. They have been incredibly important to us. And yet, that international border and that different form of government, which is integrated, obviously, in Victoria for British Columbia, has held us apart for a long period of time. So, our committee, LCEDR, has engaged in multiple meetings with MLAs, members of the Legislative Assembly is what they call their members of the Legislative Assembly, to forge a more formalized relations in which we would more regularly meet to deal with the issues that confront us both. Because you know what? Just about every issue that confronts us both doesn't know there's an international border separating us. If Mount Baker blows, it doesn't know there's a border. When the Nooksack River floods, it doesn't know there's a border. When there's a problem with fish runs that go from Alaska down into Washington, they don't know where the international border is. And as a consequence, I think it's important, especially as Vancouver becomes Vancouver, Canada. By the way, that's the second Vancouver. The first Vancouver. Vancouver, Washington, is the oldest continuously inhabited non-Indian settlement in the entire Pacific Northwest. And it was 50-some years after the establishment of Vancouver, Washington, that those pretenders to the north changed their name from Granville to Vancouver, British Columbia. And as somebody who was born and raised in Vancouver, Washington, I'm not bitter, I'm not holding on to this, but as the rapid growth in the greater Vancouver, BC economy continues, it becomes more integrated with that of the I-5 corridor and certainly Central Puget Sound. It would behoove us to have regular conversations about how it is that we can deal with these problems and preempt them before they become bigger. So, let me just conclude by saying, I'm an internationalist. I believe in the paramount importance of multinational relationships. I believe in the ancient African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. We need to go together. It's a greater route to prosperity and peace for all if we do that. Indeed, I would even say, as a former Secretary of State once said, in terms of the international stage, America still remains the indispensable nation. We don't really have a choice if we want to see a peaceful, prosperous world for all people, for us to stand down and become isolations. We do not have a choice. And frankly, some of this perspective was forged in me when I served in the United States Congress, and I had the great privilege to be on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, and I traveled the world extensively in that capacity. These were very posh accommodations, flying across the Atlantic in a military air transport with a curtained lavatory, staying in military bases, not in hotels, not exactly, but the opportunity to meet with the political and economic officers of our missions throughout the world was absolutely amazing and educational and a privilege on my part. And all of that travel and all of the education I tried to glean for myself has led me to the following conclusion. Our world, and this would be no surprise to anybody sitting here, really faces two grave threats. The first, of course, is climate change, on which we're beginning to make some progress. The big question being, are we making it fast enough? And that's an open question. And the second is the rise of authoritarianism. Unfortunately, there are authoritarian impulses alive even domestically, which concerns me greatly. But it is part of a worldwide movement. You see it everywhere, where those who come to power, sometimes democratically and legitimately, then spend all their time and effort making sure they stay in power, not democratically. And to combat these two great threats is going to require all of us working together, especially the United States, but even including the individual component states, such as Washington State and the relatively unimportant office of Lieutenant Governor. And that's my conclusion, and if I don't do this now, I'm going to be in trouble later. I forgot to acknowledge the presence of Washington State's second lady, my wife Paula. We're newlyweds. You laugh, please.
Yeah.
I think we got more than you guys, right? How many you got?
57.
We do not have more than
Gotcha.
Marty. We are newlyweds. We've been 47 years. So,
Starting to sound serious.
Y'all have any questions? Oh, thanks for coming.
Does anybody have any questions?
Karen, I'll start. Thank you so much for your remarks. A lot of us were, to say the least, very dismayed with the previous federal administration and the strained relationships internationally. Have you, from your perspective in Congress, now with Lieutenant Governor, interactions with others, seen improvements in that? Still fear from other countries of the unpredictability of our foreign policy? What kinds of perspectives do you have on that?
It's a really good question. Thank you for it. So our global relations improved dramatically and almost immediately with the Biden administration, frankly. And I will tell you this story. But by the way, this is not a done deal, and we're not at 100%. You may have read this story recently where President Zelensky was in Germany, Germany being the #2 supporter of the Ukraine in their effort to repel the Russian invasion. And they were talking about the potential need for Germany to become #1 should there be a change in our administration next year. They are thinking about it in these terms. They're planning, they're concerned. And I will tell you this, I had an ambassador, and I won't say who, because it was a private conversation, but he was an ambassador to the United States. This is not a consul general located in San Francisco or Seattle. This was an ambassador posted in Washington, D.C. from a major European country, that's all I'll say about the background, who said to me, if the previous president is reelected, we're done with you. And I think there is a lot of that sentiment in the world. And I think we have to be very careful. Now, I will also say that we have a more immediate, short-term, serious issue to deal with. And I've been preaching this story for those of you who have listened to me anywhere over the last year. Keep your eye on the debt limit. If we default on the debt limit, America's standing in the world will tumble immediately. And so will our economic situation. This is not hyperbole, what you read and see on television about the damage to our country if they can't figure out how to get past the debt limit at the end of the month.
Anybody else?
Oh, really, Steve? Like you can't call me up anytime?
On a little less dramatic subject, years ago there was a proposal to run high-speed rail between Vancouver, BC, Seattle, Portland, down to Eugene. Have you been hearing anything about that? And if so, what difficulties would happen crossing the border between Canada and the United States?
Well, crossing the border is the least of the difficulties. British Columbia wants this very, very badly. After all, if this is the border, here's Vancouver, here's the rest of the length of the rapid. So they pay for this, and they like the idea a lot. And in fact, there appear to slowly but surely be a growing number of people in the legislature warm to this idea. Senator Leas, who chairs the Transportation Committee, in fact put in last year, fact check me on this, Steve, I think 45 million in advance funding and development, not for actual property acquisition or anything. And those of us who have traveled in other countries on high-speed trains, especially LEV trains, just no comparison. I tell people the story all the time about when I was in Congress, I would on occasion have the need to take a train up to New York. I always tried to go on the Excella, the one with the least stops. And what I mean by that, if it was so politically, for business class to be as comfortable as possible. And yet, in the Excella, in business class, you can't sit and write. You know what I mean? You've ever been on a LEV train? You could fill coffee cup to the absolute brim, and you'd never spill a drop. The comparison between, heck, Paula and I went to Italy, the old country for her, several years ago. And in Italy, in Japan, and other countries, they have modern, fast, efficient rail travel. But I'll tell you this, to poke a high-speed train from Vancouver, BC to Portland is going to cost way more than the proponents of it are suggesting it will. When all is said and done, they talk about Sound Transit being the most expensive public works infrastructure project in our state's history. It would be dwarfed by that. And how it is that we could acquire the right-of-way and do this. Look what they tried to do it in California, and it seems to have done a great big faceplant. This is going to be very hard if we're going to do it. And, you know, not to suggest anything about your age, my friends, because I'm kind of your age. We're not going to live to see it, is the bottom line. Whether or not it will come to pass, big open question. But there are efforts to do it.
Thank you. To what extent have you been involved in the situation with Ukraine?
So, did everybody hear the question? Yeah. To what extent have we been involved in Ukraine? Well, I was very involved with Ukraine when I was a member of the Intel Committee because I served on the panel. You do not want me to do this Ms. Sanders.
Oh, go ahead. I need to follow you a little better.
I told you I didn't want you to video this.
Yes, but I didn't listen.
I was a member of the panel when we did the investigation that led to the impeachment, in part because of the conversation. Pardon? The first? Yes, because of the conversation that the president had, President Zelensky, about I just need you to do me a favor. So I've been involved in it for many, many years. And in my current capacity, we actually are as well. There's a wonderful guy named Valerie Goborodko, who is the honorary consul from Ukraine in Seattle. And we've met with him many times. We attempt to promote and coordinate efforts to support the people of Ukraine through various charitable donations. And we hold that up as high a profile and as often as we can. I'm pretty direct about this. You know, y'all know this. You get to be our age. It's like, what do we have to lose? Right? So this was an unconscionable act of aggression by Russia. He's been indicted as a war criminal. That doesn't happen very often. And it is unconscionable that they're trying to do it. If we as a country believe in self-determination, we will stand by Ukraine as long as it takes. Very glad about this. Michael Cato, question. He's behind you. Thank you. Be interesting to see what your question is, Michael.
Well, thank you very much. I'm a big fan of yours, and I've heard you speak a couple of times. And, for those in the audience, the Lieutenant Governor absolutely lit up the room last year at the Economic Development Conference, talking about housing. That still reverberates in my world today, but I'm not going to ask you about housing. I'm going to ask you a question about innovation and its role in Washington State's economy, and where you feel we need to be thinking about innovative for economic developers, for community, and I'm kind of couching this in the sense of your comment about global warming. That's what I lose sleep about at night. Is there a role for Washington State's employers, economies, schools in global discussion about global warming? There's got to be one, but it seems like we need to be a little bit more aggressive about it. And I'm just kind of curious about getting your personal kind of take on that in directives to people like me.
We're leaders, and I am proud of that. We are global leaders, and I am proud of that. Now, as a consequence of the cap and trade legislation passed, we in this legislative session actually began appropriating the proceeds from the auction of the purchase of the carbon credits. And that money is going to flow into our various systems in this state to create a more green economy. And there will be lots of innovation as we do that, especially when it is combined with the Inflation Reduction Act. Kind of a misnomer, frankly. It was really as much climate and infrastructure investment act as it was anything. Larger scale of appropriations to fund these kinds of investments, including innovation, than in our nation's history, frankly, not to exaggerate. In fact, you once told me, and I'm quoting you verbatim, Denny, I've told you 100 million times not to exaggerate. So I've tried not to. But we got a lot of money coming here and in the pipeline. I would cite in particular our opportunity to compete for green hydrogen. This holds forth the opportunity to be a big game changer, but it's only one of many ways as we move toward electric vehicles. I happen to know some really smart people who have decided to go ahead and buy electric vehicles sitting in this room. And I'm not going to mention their names, please. And I'm sure there are others. It's the end of a long day. Cut me some slack here.
And you mentioned authoritarianism. And
Use the mic. Can't hear.
So
Use the mic.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, you mentioned authoritarianism. As a biologist, I was wondering what in our species other people make decisions for you. And to the extent that's real, I'm wondering how can we fight authoritarianism effectively, given perhaps what is the biology behind
May I ask your first name, sir?
that?
Matt. I mean this very respectfully, I really do. I don't accept your premise. I do not accept the premise that Homo sapiens as a species is given to authoritarianism. Some people are, and under certain conditions, more people are, but I don't believe we're hardwired to like or give ourselves in to authoritarianism. Doesn't mean we don't. Human history is full of those examples, right? In fact, I wouldn't consider myself a biologist, but that's what my degree was into, actually. I think that which distinguishes us as a species isn't necessarily our superior native intellectual prowess or our opposable thumbs. It's that we get things done when we collaborate. That's how we advance, when we work together. The idea of the lone wolf inventor there are good examples of that throughout history. That's not how we've advanced. There's a lot of good research that suggests the basic, hesitate to use this term, tribal unit is about 150 people. And that's what we were hardwired to do, is be a part of a 150-person unit. That's a little bit less than the 335 million that country. But, I think it was not Cicero, one of the ancient Greeks said, give me a lantern so as I walk the wilderness, I may find my fellow man, and give me a scythe in case I come upon one.
Madeleine Albright spoke on fascism with speak to his concern.
Tyranny,
It's called fascism.
fascism. Madeline was absolutely amazing. I had the great privilege to meet with her several times. She was a bright person. In fact, she's the one who said America's the indispensable nation. First one I heard say that. Sure being there.
Anybody else?
What do you think about the role of our need to control TikTok and the influence that China may have and the information they may get through some of the social media?
Well, I'm not a big fan of the net effects of social media platforms in our democracy. This is a part aside from the TikTok question, which I will return to. I'm very concerned about our civic health. Again, this is my 51st year. I've drawn some conclusions that aren't popular in every quarter, but one of which is we don't have to hate each other just because we disagree. We seem to be losing our capacity to understand that. We seem to be losing our capacity to engage in respectful discourse. And I want to make sure that I'm clear that I believe respectful discourse includes good listening too, especially to those that are traditionally marginalized. We also seem to be losing our capacity to understand that our default effort ought to be to try to find common ground. And if I'm correct, that's a recipe for a degradation of the health of our democracy. I believe social media platforms play a significant role in this. Social media platforms' business model, in some regards, is inherently corrupt. In some regards, their business model says this: we make more money the more often you come to our site, and the longer you stay on our site. And because we've got some pretty good scientists and neuroscientists, we understand the areas of your brain where we need to push buttons to get you to do that. And they have a lot to do with fear and anger. And we jump up and down on those buttons to release that dopamine, which is literally addictive to the brain. So that's a digression to your question. Your question was about a particular social media application that comes from China. First of all, good luck to Greg enforcing this in Montana. Good luck. You know, now how are you going to do that? Not sure how they're going to do that. Not even sure it's constitutional to say to somebody privately you cannot do that. But the broader, more interesting question is, what is our strategic relationship with the People's Republic of China? And the reality is, they're the second largest economy in the world, and they almost have the highest number of people. I think they just got surpassed by India, which is a democracy with increasing authoritarian impulses. But there's no future in which we define our relationship with China as 100% adversarial. But what we have to figure out how to do is to constructively engage with them where we can and make clear our values and our boundaries where we cannot. Now, there's no question that China has abandoned a long-standing policy of not being aggressively expansionist as they make investments for thinly veiled military operations in Djibouti, as they build up the islands in the South China Sea that they claim ownership of, and as they increasingly saber-rattle with Taiwan. But this is another example of increased authoritarianism by President Xi Jinping, holding on to power, going way beyond what he said he would do, and continuing to grasp the levers and buttons of power. I don't think we could just say, you're 100% the enemy, and that's it. I think we have to figure out a way to constructively engage them where we can. And I don't frankly think, you know, the rhetoric associated with the TikTok bans, you know, they never say the People's Republic of China. They say the Chinese Communist Party. But, you know, that's we're all old enough to remember this. Yeah, so, 1950s redux, we've been here. We know what's going on here. But it doesn't mean that we can just turn our backs on the second largest economy in the world. And at the same time, we have to be very clear-eyed about what it is they've evolved into and how they operate in the world.
Many of us were very proud of the gun legislation that was passed this term, but the fact that it was totally partisan votes is disturbing. Do you have any insights or suggestions or knowledge of pathways to find common ground here in Washington that will make for sensible gun laws that are not so partisan?
No. There are a handful of issues on which I don't see common ground being achieved in the immediate to midterm. Gun safety legislation would be one. Reproductive rights would be another. We just are worlds apart, and for either political reasons or reasons of sincerely held values, do not see the world the same way. But when you ask about making progress, we're like leaders in the country now. So I'm not sure what the next steps are. Maybe you've got some ideas, but you know, we raised the age to buy it. We made manufacturers liable, which I think may end up actually having as big an impact as the assault weapon ban, which we also do. We have background checks where other states don't. We have as many tools in place as I believe any state in the country. Could be wrong. I also want to acknowledge the presence of one of my heroes, Senator Karen Frazier.
I voted for all that.
There's very little that's been accomplished in the last, hate to date you this way, buddy, but 2 generations that hasn't had significant imprint on that incredible human being. Linda, really?
Of particular concern to us was the deficit of the State Department by the previous administration. Not only was it gutted, it didn't replace the people who either were forced to leave or left. And we're hoping that this administration has, but you can't just replace that huge deficit. And as you know, the State Department protects our son from having to go to war. So it's really a high concern to us. And I just wanted to hear from you what you thought the current state of the State Department is.
Don't know. A little out of touch after 3 years, but I do know what he attempted to do. Succeeded in some regards. But look, you're not going to be effective on the global stage without using all the basic tools. All the basic tools of soft power, like economic aid and support for NGOs, and having a strong military. Thank Colonel Lamb for his service once again for me, please. And having a strong diplomatic corps, people who will continue to talk with one another. We can't stop talking. Can't stop talking. Relationships matter. Relationships matter a lot. And these exchanges we have where, for example, for countries that have been friendly, we put them through our war college. These officer-to-officer relationships actually manifest in hot zones when there is a need to deconflict. It's really important to have a trained professional military and a trained professional diplomatic corps and a strategic plan for how you're going to utilize soft power.
I'm not a regular visitor here, but I certainly hope to be in the future. And I really want to know, I get a lot of emails that say the time to negotiate is here as far as Ukraine, and I'm wondering what you see.
Negotiate what?
Well, negotiate peace.
It's not achievable at the present time. Unless we're willing to say, sorry, President Zelensky, give up all of Eastern Ukraine. It's not achievable. President Putin has dug himself into this hole where he can't back down. And frankly, I don't think he can win either. So I'm just not sure. I know that look, we all want the fighting to stop. Of course we do. We want the killing to stop. But I don't see the Ukrainian people being willing to give up their homeland. And oh, by the way, first Crimea, then Eastern Ukraine, then what? We're all old enough to remember when we learned this lesson before in World War II. This is not new. Steve, I hope your questions a little bit more of an optimist.
Before we repeat, did I see a hand here?
I did, but
Steve's already had a chance.
actually, this goes back to Judy's question about partisanship for the gun legislation. I have read and heard more things about bipartisan activities in the legislature than I remember seeing for quite some time. Is that true?
That is absolutely true, and I cannot tell you how impressed I am that you have picked up on that. It's not the kind of thing that most people pick up on. The operating budget, which is the usually most partisan document in the legislature, passed in the state Senate with 37 out of 49 votes. There are only 29 Democrats. The minority leader voted for the operating budget. The Blake fix from Tuesday, 83 votes out of 98 in the House, 43 out of 49 in the Senate. Look, they have their differences. Never the twain shall meet. But the truth is, the state Senate especially, it's Northwest nice. We wait for the light to change before we use the crosswalk. These people, by and large, engage in respectful discourse. I continue to be concerned because A, it's not all the time, and B, the influences that are dragging us down as a country, we're not immune from. That's why we've launched the Civic Health Project in our office. I didn't mention that, did I? Yeah, we've got a Civic Health Project. We're about to get going. But yes, they're much more collaborative. They have their disagreements. I always feel funny making this qualification. Some people don't always understand, but we don't want them agreeing 100% of the time. We really don't. We want to know what the loyal opposition thinks the flaws are. We want to know what the loyal opposition thinks would be a better way to fix a problem. It just shouldn't be that way on everything, and it shouldn't be that way so extremely that we do not deal with the issues confronting us. Exhibit A, the United States Congress.
Well, Cindy stole my question. I'd like to delve a little bit down further, deeper in that.
Cindy? Cindy?
Comedy,
Cindy,
not
how many
comedy,
times
but comedy between the opposing sides. From afar now, it seemed to me the last 2 years have been extraordinary in the legislature, at least the last year. And is that because of what factors? Is it the personalities of the leadership on both sides, both houses? Is it the grassroots there? Or, and I wouldn't doubt that you had some influence in the Senate on this, but how did this occur, and is it as dramatic as it seems to me to be?
Yes, it is, buddy. So I do think there's the issue of our heritage and our culture, which is by and large and on average better than most places in this regard. But I think it's been helpful that they haven't had resource shortages. And how many years do you work for the legislature, Steve? 30?
No, 28 and a half.
28 and a half years. You know, when they get short of dollars, they get really what my mom used to call alley. And they have not had a shortage of dollars, so that's lubricant. But then lastly, and you alluded to this, Andy Billig, the Senate Majority Leader, Jamie Peterson, the Senate Majority Floor Leader, John Braun, the Senate Minority Leader, Shelley Short, the Minority Floor Leader, and I would throw in many others, Christine Rolfes, who chaired Ways and Means, and Linda Wilson, who was the ranking member. They lead into it. Leadership matters. The individuals who hold those positions matter. And that's how they wanted to do business. And I give an enormous amount of credit to the majority minority party, which I'm proud to be a member, but I gotta say this about John. The easiest thing in the world to do when you're the minority leader is just throw rocks. John has chosen to constructively engage in order to have the biggest impact on the outcomes, even if it's not perfect. He wants to make it better than it otherwise would have been, other than just throwing rocks. And I think John deserves an awful lot of credit for that. I genuinely do. This is, if too many Democrats heard me say that, they would be mad at me or something, but it's how I see it.
This is a two-party system if you don't have two parties.
That's right.
Anybody else? Here I come.
Could you speak more about the debt limit? You named it as a really serious issue, which it is, but I'm just wondering.
What does that look like?
Yeah, what's it really look like?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we don't know that they're going to default on the debt limit. Understand that the Congress passes a budget and then sets a debt limit, which they then have to exceed in order to pay the bills that they've already obligated themselves to. This is 101. I want to make sure everybody understands this. It's important to understand this because those who say we ought to default on the debt limit in order to control spending, that's kind of like you went out and you put all these charges on your credit card and you get the bill and you go, well, I don't like that, I'm cutting up the bill. That's what that's doing. We've already obligated ourselves to these spending loans. And I understand that there are those who think the federal government spends too much. I actually even think that's debatable. That's arguable. Do we spend too much? Should we spend more? Should we spend less? That's a fair debate to have. It's when you're passing the budget. It's not when you're paying the bills for the budget you already passed. That's a big difference. Now, default could take many forms. None of them are good. The ways out are a clean debt limit lift, which is what we've always done. Meaning, go ahead and keep paying the bills we've already obligated. They could negotiate, as Speaker McCarthy wants to do, to significantly reduce spending, which they don't really want to identify in detail because it wouldn't be that popular, frankly, and the like. And alternatively, the president could choose to invoke, as you've all read by now, Section 14, Section 14th Amendment, which says it shall not be questioned. I read a really interesting article the other day by Lawrence Tribe, a great legal mind, who said, no, it's not about the 14th Amendment. It's about the fact you have all these other laws that require you to make these payments. Why is the debt limit law the one that's transcended? I'm looking at my friend, the brilliant lawyer, Steve Lundy. He said, don't invoke the 14th Amendment. Instead say, we're legally obligated to pay these, and we have a whole bunch of legal obligations in law to pay these things. They weigh more than this one over here. I know the party line has been, we have to negotiate this thing, but I believe the consequences, which is really the question that I'll get to, are so drastic. I hope the president does what he has to do to avoid this. So, if we default on the debt limit, what that means is we can't pay all our bills. So the first question is, what bills do we pay? Do we pay for Colonel Lamb's salary? I should hope
His
so.
family to live.
Do we pay for the Social Security that Colonel Lamb's parents are on? What do we pay for? And how do we decide? World markets, capital markets, will no longer believe that the good faith and credit of the United States is the gold standard globally. And what that means is that the United States dollar is the world's currency reserve of preference will become at risk. And this gets very complicated, but it's because the dollar is the most trusted currency in the world that we have leverage internationally. It's how we can levy sanctions, because we've got the dollars. So it will immediately plunge, maybe too strong a term, us into a recession. It will structurally diminish our standing in the world in a long-term fashion, and our ability to operate as freely and as effectively on the global stage will be diminished. All because some people want to.
But can I do a follow-up?
Absolutely.
Don't they get it? Don't they understand the crisis? Or, I mean, is this?
How could they do this?
Yeah. How can they do this?
I'm going to answer with a question that sounds snarky, but I don't mean it to.
It's probably. Okay.
What part of ideologue don't you understand? Right? It's the nature of it.
I mean, don't they get? I mean, is it a dance that we're doing, or is it really
I hope it is.
misunderstood and misunderstood how this all works?
They believe the other side will blame.
Don't they understand that the yen is just waiting to take the place of the dollar in the world market?
The yen and several other
Well, then
currencies.
that's the positioning.
The Chinese currency, several others. They think we'll blink. They think.
Well, I'm gone. I can speak now. What do you see as the downsides of Biden invoking the 14th Amendment? Are there any?
Well, if the alternative is to default, I take it.
There seems to be some reluctance on some voters to do it.
Yes,
I
there
wonder what
is.
you know, would be
I don't know that I understand. I don't know that I understand that. Just because I perceive the consequence of a default to be so damaging and long-term. I mean, we're all sitting here tonight, mostly friends, intellectually curious, like to think and talk about this stuff. Here it is, what, May 18th, whatever today is. Fat and happy. In 3 weeks, we could be plunged into a recession. And America's standing in the world gone or diminished permanently. I mean, I just can't fathom. But, you know, we're the only nation in the world that there's two of us that have debt limit deals, but the other one has some kind of eased it. One of the Netherlands. It's easier for them to raise their debt limit than here. I don't think we ought to have debt limit. I'm unafraid. Later, if they reach an agreement that does not involve significant budget reductions, then I'll make a prediction for you, not a pleasant one. We will have a government shutdown this fall. Because that's when the hard negotiations will take place. That's when the House Republican majority will say, we don't want to spend that much. And the lead up to that will be the same as it was on the debt limit. Sure, show us your budget that reduces that spending. Because then they're going to have to be very specific. They're going to actually have to detail how many veterans don't get service, how much Medicaid gets cut off, what happens to our military. I mean, they were pretty funny in how they said, well, not the military, not Social Security. You're at half the budget already, right? I mean, okay, it's going to be very interesting.
I'm sorry to have to say, if you want to ask a question, you'll just have to speak loudly. Dead. Dead.
Karen, Linda? That's Karen.
I'll stand because it's easier without a mic for us to hear each other. When you were our congressman, I almost contacted you to ask you what it would take for anybody who runs for federal office to have to take the American citizenship test. I'm serious, because as a former social studies teacher, it galls me the number of people who can serve as representatives at the federal level and not know how the government works. Our citizens who are newly naturalized know much more than they, and they are serving at that high level and don't get it.
So,
So I'm
Linda
seriously.
does not mean to imply that I could not have done well in the citizenship test. We actually have data. It turns out that when people take the test to become naturalized citizens, they pass by over 90% the first try, 90%. Turns out when you administer that test to a native-born person, it's in the mid-30s, give or take. So put it another way, Linda, Congress is just reflecting the population at large. I tell you, the citizenship, we got a few more minutes, Karen? Story time. So when I was in Congress, I had this great privilege and pleasure to go to these naturalization ceremonies. And if you've never been, take plenty of handkerchiefs. This is just, it's so cool. So auditors often administer these. Mary Hall asked me to come out to South Puget Sound, and it was a big group. And at the very beginning, they asked them to stand up by country, and they read through 27 countries that were present. And there was one young man from Russia, and he was young, not very old at all. He was a young man, kind of had longish hair. And I kind of perked up because 1,000 years ago, I took Russia before the wall fell.
And have long hair.
And had long hair, I said. And so when the ceremony was over, Mary said, if you'd like to have a picture taken with the congressman, line up. You know, they all did. I don't know why, but they all did. And I'm shaking their hands, and I see the Russian. Let's get closer, let's get closer. And he gets up to me, and I shake his hand, and I say, Здравствуйте, товарищ. Как вы поживаете? Мое имя Алексей Викторович. Как вас зовут? Which is to say, hi, how are you, friend? I speak Russian. Я говорю по-русски языка. My name's Alex Viktorovich. How are you? And he blinked at me twice and did this. Dude, I came here 2 years old to speak a word. You could have been a surfer, dude. Okay, I'm kind of embarrassed.
We have a microphone again. Thank you, Anders. Any other questions? Any other questions? Okay.
Who's the next person to run for governor?
Who is the next person to announce?
To announce.
I don't know what's happening on the Republican side. Dr. Garcia announced. I don't know if they're going to have somebody that would kind of intuitively look more viable. Dr. Garcia ran before at 5.4% of the vote out of 30 candidates. He's not, I'm not sure that everybody talked about Bruce Stanmeyer, fine guy, county executive, Pierce County, but Bruce has said no, I'm not crazy. So I don't know on the R side. Attorney General Ferguson has announced, my Commissioner Franz has announced. A lot of speculation that State Senator Martin Mullet will announce. I'm not sure that I've heard the names of anyone else that is well-known that is considering. Honey, have we talked about anybody? Might I forget somebody? Who? What? Yeah.
This is your chance.
So I am here in an official capacity. I should not be engaging in conversations about politics, especially since it's being recorded. But let me just say, I couldn't win. I don't want the job. I'm not sure I understand your question.
Anybody else? So, Denny, before we let you go, since we're not allowed to sell your book here tonight, are you allowed to at least say a little bit about what your book is about?
I can try. I'm not asking anybody to buy my book.
We can tell them what it's about.
So this was my fourth book. This one's called Sausage. And it's basically about how Congress works and sometimes doesn't work. And it's a lot of storytelling from my time in Congress. Everything from some of what went on in the Intel bunker that I can share, to relations with Nancy Pelosi. Somebody commented to me the other day, they love the story about how I got appointed to the Intelligence Committee. Well, if you've all heard it, I won't tell you. Do you or do you not want to hear it?
I want to hear it, yeah.
It's a very good story.
From the minute I got in Congress, I wanted to get appointed to the Intelligence Committee. Because, in fact, frankly, I love the geopolitical stuff. And we already had ample representation on the Armed Services Committee. Adam Smith chaired it. Other people from the area were on it. I didn't really want to be on the Foreign Affairs Committee per se, but I wanted something with a stronger security component. And of course, that's Intel, has both security and the geopolitical stuff. So I started lobbying right away. We had an opening. Chuy Garcia, who just ran for mayor of Chicago, had his head ended, vacated. And so I talked to then Minority Leader Pelosi and said, I'm really interested in this. And she said, so the Hispanic caucus believes, since Chuy was a member, that it's important that they have representation on the committee. And I go, God, I get it, okay. But I want you to know if there's ever another opening. I'm interested. So fast forward to the 16 election. And there was going to be an opening. I can't remember who it was, but somebody was going off, not running. So I approached Minority Leader, we called her Leader Pelosi, and said, I remember we had this conversation, I'd be interested. And she said, I do remember, but there's somebody else who's a lot more senior. I go, well, look, I'm highly motivated. I will do a good job. I will be it. She goes, keep it in mind. And she shoots me the kiss on me. So we get up to the election, and we pick up 12 seats, as I recall. And I saw her again. This is like in November. I said, just wanted to remind you. She said, Denny, this other person has a lot more seniority. I went, wait, Leader, I have an idea. We picked up 12 seats. Can we negotiate for a different ratio of Democrats and Republicans on the committee? Because we have now more members, and that sometimes happens. She goes, that's a good idea. Let me see what I can do, which was a kiss. And so fast forward, I see her, I go, and he said no. Well, I'm still really interested. She said, Denny, this other person has a lot more seniority. She said, okay, please keep me. So we come into January, we vote for speaker on day one, that ridiculously long exercise where we all stand up and vote. And every member of your party votes for your person, knowing they'll lose, if you're in the minority, and vice versa. Except that in our party, the party of Will Rogers, I'm not a member of any organized political party on the Democrat, in our party, there are always a tiny number that wouldn't vote, especially because Leader Pelosi was controversial in some areas. So we had 4 people that didn't vote for her. And a couple weeks go by, nothing's happened. I actually don't see any appointments from the Intel Committee. You've all watched C-SPAN, those kind of pews, the benches. And I'm walking this way. And Nancy is down one, she's walking this way. And I just hear her say, appoint to the Intel Committee. And I think, I didn't hear the first part of that sentence. I'm pretty sure it was, and that's why I couldn't appoint you to the Intel Committee. And I said, excuse me, leader, I just want to make sure I heard this right. She says, I've decided to appoint you to the Intel Committee. And I went, what? She goes, yeah, you'll do a great job. I'm appointing you to the Intel Committee. Do you remember those 4 people that voted against her for speaker? One of them had a lot more seniority. Now, lest you get the wrong impression, Nancy didn't govern that way all the time. She was pretty selective. She's tough, smart, as good a vote counter as ever served in the United States Congress. And she would do it on occasion to maintain discipline. And frankly, I'm supportive of that. If you can't have some discipline, you're nothing but a group of 212 individuals go in 212 different directions. But she didn't do it all the time. And in fact, she would sometimes bring her former enemies into her embrace as a way to win them over. She was very, very good. Yeah. He really shouldn't have done that. I've never revealed who he is, but it wouldn't be appropriate for me to say Ron Kyne's name. He's since retired from Congress. Probably because he didn't get to the Intel.
On that note, I think that's all the time we have this evening. Thank you again for all of you. Thanks to all of you for joining us this evening as well. As I said earlier this evening, we'll start our programs up again in September. And just to provide you with a little bit of a teaser, we are currently negotiating with Rick Steves to be our September speaker. So hope to see you in 3 months for that, or 2 months. Is that 3 months or 2 months? It's always been terrible now. 4. Good Lord. All right then. Anyway, again, thank you very much. And thank you.